It was a routine night on the city's outskirts, dim streetlights flickering as a sleek black car rolled to a stop at a quiet intersection. Moments later, flashing red and blue lights erupted behind it. Two officers stepped out, their faces cold and smug. "Step out of the car," one barked, his hand resting on his holster. The driver, a sharply dressed black man, calmly complied. "What's this about, officer?" he asked, his voice steady. "You tell me," the other officer sneered. "Driving a car like this doesn't exactly scream law-abiding citizen, does it?" The man raised an eyebrow, his calm demeanor unwavering. But as the officers began searching the car without permission, he finally spoke words that would shatter their smug confidence. "Do you have any idea who I am?" The question hung in the air like a thunderclap. What happened next would expose a deeply rooted corruption they never thought would come to light. Before we jump into today's story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. If you love powerful stories of justice, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, so you never miss what's coming next. Now, let's get started. He wasn't the kind of man you'd overlook, but he was exactly the kind people underestimated. Marcus Reed, tall, composed, with a piercing gaze that seemed to see through a person's soul, wasn't just another man in a tailored suit. By day, he was the state's chief prosecutor, a powerhouse who had dismantled criminal empires with nothing more than his words and unshakable integrity. By night, he was a humble father, a mentor to troubled teens, and a quiet force for justice in his community. But that night, standing under the glare of police lights, Marcus didn't look like the state's top legal mind. To the officers in front of him, he was just another black man in an expensive car, someone who didn't belong in their world. As they rifled through his belongings, their comments grew bolder, more venomous. Marcus remained silent, observing, calculating. His restraint wasn't born of fear, it was strategy, because in his world, justice wasn't shouted, it was delivered with precision. Little did those officers know, they had just made the mistake of their lives. Marcus wasn't just going to defend himself, he was about to expose a system rotten to its core, and his next move would leave them, and the entire department utterly defenseless. "Got something here," one officer exclaimed, pulling a folded paper from the glove compartment with a theatrical smirk. It was a receipt, nothing incriminating, but he waved it as if it were a smoking gun. Marcus watched in silence, his hands steady at his sides as the officers began their charade. "Driving a car like this, huh? Wonder what you had to do to afford it," the taller cop said, his voice dripping with disdain. The other officer chimed in, "Drugs, maybe. Or some of that welfare fraud? Don't worry, we'll figure it out." Marcus felt the heat of injustice boiling beneath his calm exterior. He had spent years dismantling stereotypes like these in courtrooms, fighting to protect people who couldn't defend themselves. But tonight, he was the one being hunted by prejudice. "Officers," Marcus said evenly, "are you accusing me of a crime? Because if so, I'd like to know what evidence you have." "Evidence?" The taller cop laughed. "We don't need evidence to know what's going on here. A man like you doesn't just stumble into a ride like this without cutting a few corners." Their arrogance was palpable, their abuse of power shameless. As they gestured for Marcus to lean against the car for a pat-down, his mind raced, not with fear, but with resolve. This wasn't just about him. These officers had undoubtedly done this before and would do it again unless someone stopped them. Marcus's gaze sharpened, his jaw tightened. They had no idea who they were dealing with, or the storm he was about to unleash. "Mind telling me what you're searching for?" Marcus asked, his tone calm but laced with a quiet authority that made the officers pause for a split second. They ignored the question, muttering something about probable cause as they continued rummaging through his car. Marcus decided it was time to plant the first seed of doubt. "You know," he said, his voice steady, "I've spent years studying cases like this, stops like these, unjustified searches, violations of civil rights, and I've seen how it ends. for the officers involved. The taller cop froze, his hand on the edge of the back seat. "What are you trying to say?" he asked, his bravado slipping just slightly. Marcus allowed a small smile to play at the corners of his mouth. "I'm saying you're digging a hole you won't be able to climb out of, and when the spotlight shines on you, the whole world will see exactly what's happening here." The officers exchanged uneasy glances, but their pride wouldn't let them back down. "Big talk for someone who's about to spend the night in a cell," the shorter officer sneered. But Marcus wasn't done. "I wouldn't be so sure about that," he replied, "because the moment I walk out of here, every single action you've taken tonight will be under scrutiny. And trust me, I have the power to make sure you'll answer for every second of it." The weight of his words hung in the air, heavy and unshakable. The officers didn't know it yet, but Marcus Reed wasn't just any man with legal knowledge. He was the man who could bring their entire department to its knees, and the moment of reckoning was closer than they dared to imagine. "All right, tough guy," the taller officer snapped, his confidence returning as he slapped a pair of handcuffs onto Marcus's wrists. "Let's see how sharp your words are down at the station." Marcus didn't resist. Instead, he locked eyes with the officer, his expression unreadable. "Every action has consequences," he said, his voice low and calm. "You might want to start thinking about yours." The ride to the station was tense. Marcus remained silent, his mind racing. He could feel the weight of years of systemic abuse behind this single encounter. He wasn't just another victim tonight. He was a man on a mission. At the station, things escalated quickly. The officers paraded Marcus through the halls, treating him like a criminal in front of their peers. They planted whispers about the guy they caught and made a show of their fabricated triumph. But Marcus was already taking mental notes. Names, faces, behavior. He knew how this game worked. The system thrived on silence and fear, and Marcus had no intention of giving them either. As they processed him, one officer sneered, "Hope you got a good lawyer, buddy. You're gonna need it." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "I don't need a lawyer," he said evenly. "I am one, and not just any lawyer. You're about to learn exactly what kind of mistake you've made." The room fell silent, the officers exchanging uncertain glances. Marcus had planted a seed of doubt, but he wasn't done yet. He knew their arrogance wouldn't let them back down, not until he showed them what he was truly capable of. And as the first call he made went straight to the governor's office, the officers began to realize they were no longer in control. This was no longer a routine stop, it was the beginning of their reckoning. The station door swung open with a loud creak and a sharp voice echoed through the room. "Where is he?" Every officer turned to see an impeccably dressed man stride in, flanked by two aides carrying briefcases. His presence radiated authority, and the badge clipped to his pocket was unmistakable. The state attorney general. The taller officer stammered, We didn't call you, sir." The attorney general's piercing gaze landed on Marcus, who sat calmly in the corner, still in handcuffs. Without a word, the man extended his hand. Marcus rose to his feet, a faint smile on his lips, and shook it firmly. "Good to see you, Marcus," the attorney general said, loud enough for every officer in the room to hear. The color drained from the officers' faces as realization dawned. Marcus Reed wasn't just another black man in a suit. He wasn't just a lawyer. He was the chief prosecutor of the state, the man who held their careers and their lives in his hands. "Care to explain this?" Marcus asked, his voice calm but cutting as he gestured to the cuffs on his wrists. The room was silent. The taller officer finally muttered, "It was a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding," Marcus echoed, his tone icy. "You racially profiled me, illegally searched my car, and detained me without cause. And now you want to call it a misunderstanding?" The attorney general turned to the officers, his voice like thunder. "Do you have any idea who you've just targeted? Marcus Reed has done more for this state's justice system than any of you combined. And now, thanks to your actions, every single case you've worked on is about to come under review." Marcus stepped forward, his voice calm but resolute. "This isn't just about me. It's about every person you've treated like this, every life you've disrupted because of your prejudice. And trust me, I will make sure the truth comes out." The officers stood frozen, the weight of their actions crashing down on them. Marcus had turned their power against them, and they knew their reign of unchecked authority was over. But Marcus wasn't done yet. He turned to the Attorney General. "I want a full investigation into this department. I want every record, every complaint, and every action scrutinized." The Attorney General nodded. "You'll have it. And Marcus, I'll make sure this never happens again." The room buzzed with unease as Marcus removed the cuffs himself, his calm smile now a beacon of quiet triumph. But the storm he had unleashed was only beginning. The investigation into the department began the very next day. Files were pulled, body cam footage was reviewed, and complaints that had been buried for years finally saw the light of day. It wasn't long before the truth was undeniable. This wasn't just a few bad officers. The entire precinct had been operating under a culture of prejudice and abuse of power. As the evidence mounted, officers who once stood smugly in their positions found themselves suspended, investigated, and, in some cases, arrested. Marcus watched it all unfold with quiet satisfaction, not out of vengeance but because justice was being served, something he had dedicated his life to. The media caught wind of the story, and Marcus became a symbol of resilience and accountability. In interviews, he didn't just focus on his own experience but highlighted the countless individuals who had suffered in silence. "This isn't about one night or one incident," Marcus said during a televised statement. "It's about a system that has failed too many for far too long, and it's about what we're going to do to change that. Justice doesn't belong to the powerful, it belongs to the people." The ripple effects were undeniable. Policies were reformed, new training programs were implemented, and a task force was created to ensure accountability in law enforcement across the state. But for Marcus, the victory wasn't in the headlines or the policy changes. It was in the hope he saw in the eyes of those who had been voiceless for so long. The officers who had targeted him that night. They faced trials of their own, their actions laid bare for the world to see. And though Marcus didn't relish their downfall, he understood the necessity of their reckoning. As he stood on the steps of the courthouse months later, looking out at a crowd of supporters, Marcus spoke the words that would echo far beyond that moment. "Adversity doesn't define us. How we rise against it does. Let this serve as a reminder. Integrity, resilience, and justice will always prevail. And to those who believe they can abuse their power without consequence, know that someone, somewhere, is watching, and they won't stay silent." The crowd erupted in applause, but Marcus's gaze was calm, reflective. This was just one battle in a much larger war, but it proved a truth he'd always believed. No matter how dark the night, justice would always find a way to shine through. Thank you for watching. Maya's story reminds us that standing up for what's right can create lasting change. Whether it's overcoming adversity or challenging injustice, your voice matters. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment with your thoughts on the story. Let's keep this conversation going. And remember, sharing these stories helps spread the message of justice and fairness, one act of courage at a time. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today.